How's it going, everybody? Thanks for stopping by. I am super excited about this video today because it's about a topic I truly enjoy, and that's talking about archetypes. And you know, what are the four main survival types that we all have within us? That's right, everybody on the planet has these four archetypes that sort of fester and come out at some point in our life, and maybe you might even be able to relate to some of them as we go along and talk about them. So sit tight, we're going to talk about them and let's get into it. Okay, so archetypes have been around for a long time. We're talking about like the time of Plato, if not even before then, when we're talking about ancient man, without them even realizing they were already developing archetypes for us to use throughout history. Think about, you know, the wise old man. That in itself is an archetype. You know, we can all picture with, you know, gray hair and maybe a long beard. Maybe he's wearing, you know, some gown made out of burlap. I don't know, maybe he has a staff, maybe he's Gandalf kind of thing. Like that right there is pure archetype. So if you know anything about, or maybe you have heard of a man named Carl Jung, and he was one of the, I guess you can say, like a founding father of an archetype. He studied archetypes through and through, and you know, he's well known for a lot of his shadow work, and he really developed sort of a system, 12 archetypes. But today we're going to talk about the four main ones. Might do a part 2 on the 12, but the four main ones is something that we all sort of inherit, like I mentioned before. So archetypes are actually not developed as an individual basis, but they're not exclusive to each person, but more they are sort of collectively inherited by different memories that are put together, packaged neatly, and passed down through either stories or religion, fairy tales, novels, and we sort of take these in, we accept them as an archetype, as a type of someone, or as a type of something. So Carl Jung said that there are three main realms to the human mind, to the psyche, and the first one is the consciousness, and that is basically anything that comes into our field of awareness, our knowledge, things that we know about, okay? When we look at the second realm, the consciousness really just barely scratches the surface. The individual unconsciousness is the second realm. These are individualized experiences that we've either repressed, forgotten about, or deemed insignificant to remember. So we just kind of tuck it away into our unconsciousness. And a lot of our shadow self, according to Carl Jung, resonates in this individual unconsciousness. And then the second part, which is probably the most unique and maybe the most difficult to grasp, is the collective unconsciousness. And the collective unconsciousness is basically categories that consist of different unique individual experiences, but something we all share. We all share a common ancestry, and within that is similar patterns that have been carried from time to time to time. These patterns are communicated through their storytelling as well. And for example, the archetype of the mother. The mother was the nurturer. She was the caregiver. She sort of kept the family together. And we still adapt these sort of ideas when we think about a mother archetype. So their idea, or the idea, is to make it easy for them to conceptualize reality. So for example, ancient men, they are out there hunting and they come out to a really large animal, okay? So the first thing that we assess when we're in a situation of danger is, how will I survive this best? Our first reaction, you would think, would either be to either fight or flight. But it's actually to freeze, to not move. We need time to analyze the situation and assess what would be the right thing to do here. So then what happens here is, if we choose to, let's say, fight, then we are able to understand and conceptualize that reality in that moment in time, and then we go back and we tell the story of how we survived this horrific attack. And then these stories get, embellished, maybe they get changed a little bit, they are passed down from time to time, and then these stories again develop into archetypes, these characters in the stories. So now maybe that gentleman or that lady who was up against that XYZ animal is now a hero, so there's another archetype. Or if they decided to run, maybe they're considered a coward, there's another archetype. There's so many archetypes that we can go through, but the 4 main survival ones are something that we all have. So the 4 main archetypes that we all have, and I want you to think about something here. When we start talking and diving into these archetypes, I want you to understand that these represent our fears, our vulnerabilities, our insecurities, okay? So when you're listening to the 4 main archetypes, I want you to ask yourself and keep this question in sort of the front part of your mind. What is my biggest fear? And when you're listening to each of these archetypes, see if any of these trigger something or trigger an emotion or a feeling. We can easily identify our archetypes by tapping into that shadow self of ours, and by doing that we can start the process of moving through it, embracing these qualities, because they all have their positive and negative, or what I like to call light and shadow. So going through these archetypes, I definitely want you to think about what is my biggest fear and see which of these sort of makes you feel the most uneasy. So let's get into it. So all of these archetypes are neutral in energies, despite what they may seem or sound like, okay? So the 4 main types are the child, the victim, the saboteur, and the prostitute. Now the child is actually broken down into a few subcategories, and we'll look at them right now. So the child archetype, when it's matured, it is an archetype of wonder and innocence. It's very pleasant and joyful. They see the beauty in everything. But broken down, we have the wounded child. So the wounded child, they really feel difficult to trust and unsafe in their own environment. They feel misunderstood. They need their pain to be acknowledged by others in order to feel validated. But on the lighter side, the wounded child can actually teach us about compassion, because they are able to recognize other archetypes that are similar to them in the sense of a wounded child, and they can offer compassion to them as well. The next child archetype is the abandoned or the orphan child. So the orphan child is exactly how it sounds. They feel like they don't belong in any part of a family. They feel lost, they feel unwelcomed. They don't really feel like they belong anywhere. And if you think about that in the sense of a collective archetype, we all want to be involved, or we all want to feel like we belong somewhere. It's really interesting when we talk about this particular archetype, because humanity is one that thrives on connection. And yet here we are in a day of a digital age where we disconnect so much. So many of us are experiencing this orphaned or this abandonment child archetype without even realizing that perhaps maybe we are sort of inducing that. On the lighter side, an abandonment child or an orphan child can be very independent, and they thrive on this independence. And they can teach us on how to be resourceful and sort of take charge of a situation. So that is the orphan child archetype. The next is the magical child, and the magical child literally sees the magic in everything. They see the beauty in everything. They see, they're very, very optimistic. They like to see beyond the realistic aspect of a situation and always hope for the better. But sometimes these magical child archetypes become very pessimistic, or they often fall into a state of depression So when a magical child is out of balance, they are very cynical and pessimistic and can be depressed. However, on the lighter side, they do see a world of possibilities and are very motivating and encouraging to others. So that's the magical child. The nature child. Well, the nature child is exactly how it sounds. And this nature child, they love nature. They love anything to do with nature, animals, pets, plants, you name it, they thrive in the natural elements. And they really connect with sort of that mother nature energy. So when you think about a nature child and their love for animals, and think about veterinarians and animal rights activists, when they are in their element, when we turn that around onto their shadow side, sometimes what happens is they end up acting out physically, and that means abusing the very nature that they love. So from polluting to abusing animals, to just being completely sort of disconnected from it. The eternal child. The eternal child is forever young. They have, what you could call the Peter Pan syndrome. They never want to grow up. They always want to make light of a situation. They love to be the life of the party. They don't want to grow up. They like to feel young. They like to stay young. They like to make light of everything, which is great. However, when we look on the opposite side of that, an eternal child can be very unreliable and irresponsible when it comes time to being responsible. The divine child. Well, this is a special archetype because many of us do not think that we can relate to this archetype because of its qualities. The divine child is someone who seems very mystical, so almost angelic like. They're very magical and they're very innocent, much like the magical child archetype, but there's a certain poise about them. The divine child, however, on the shadow side, they can feel quite defensive in the sense of if it's morally wrong, or if they feel sort of cornered in a situation where they have to act against their values. So those are the child archetypes and subtypes. So let's get into the next three. So the next three main archetypes, we have the victim, the saboteur, and the prostitute. So let's get into the victim. Here with the victim, they often have conversations with themselves that the outer world is out to get them, that a lot of their misfortunes are out of their control, and that they have their hands tied, so to speak. I didn't even mean to make that pun, but hey. They like to have a pity party. It's even accentuated when people acknowledge their pain. They really bask in that, okay? However, that is not necessarily entirely bad. What happens when they come into the realization is they start to become empowered and they realize that they're co-creators of their own life, so they chase after it. They sort of get their hands dirty and they're out there to help others as well to feel empowered within themselves. So that's the victim archetype. Now the saboteur. I'm gonna admit that there was a time in my life, this archetype I could honestly say I would resonate with probably the most. Keeps those sabotaging thoughts in your mind from pushing you forward to success. This is the archetype that is constantly telling you that, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not skinny enough, or whatever it is. There's always someone better than you. Why would anyone listen to you? The saboteur also lives in a state of what ifs, because they're constantly worried about, the future, and what if this happens, and what if that happens, and, they often can sabotage their friendships and relationships because they're afraid of the outcome. What if blah 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 breaks up with me, or what if I do this to piss them off? I just gonna step back from it and not pursue this relationship. However, when we sort of get in check with this archetype, we can actually be the total opposite of this. We become very confident, we become skilled, we become motivated to learn more, and we start to see ourselves in a different light. We start to see ourselves in a way that can promote our success and that can sort of thrive in an area where we will excel in. Now let's talk about the final archetype, the final survival archetype that we all have, and that's the prostitute. Now, many times when people hear this word, it can be a little bit unsettling, and it's a term that really people don't use now in this day and age. But the term prostitute, in and of itself, we can pretty much think about what it means. In an archetype sense, it is actually talking about selling out or compromising ourselves in order for a gain. For example, compromising our moral ethics in order to gain a financial reward, or compromising or manipulating someone or something in order to gain something. And this includes nice to somebody but disingenuous in order to gain something from this person. So the prostitute archetype would just as soon as sacrifice their own dreams in order to secure financial security, social security, climbing up the social ladder, even if it's not really what they're after, but the feeling of being in control of their external environment, even though their internal environment is all over the place. We've all been in a situation where we felt maybe even uncomfortable or uneasy about doing something, but we're kind of looking at the end result, whether it's, a financial gain, a big paycheck, a bonus, maybe maybe it's a social status thing. On the lighter side of it, this can actually teach us how to develop our integrity a little bit deeper and further, and we're also able to recognize these characteristics in other people as well. This is the prostitute archetype. So the four main archetypes between the child, the victim, the saboteur, and the prostitute are all four main survival archetypes that we all hold as a collective consciousness. And then there are 12 more archetypes that Carl Jung actually breaks down, which we will look at in another video. And just a disclaimer, when we talk about archetypes and personality tests, just remember that these aren't necessarily labels that you can live by for the rest of your life. The idea for these archetypes as a collective consciousness and consciousness is to learn to recognize these archetypes and see how we can work with them so that we can grow. If you were always told that you were, the mothering type, that's great, and embrace all aspects of that. But remember that that's not completely you. So I guess my final thought would be, after listening to the video, maybe go back and see which ones were triggering you the most. Alright guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe. If you are interested in more videos like this, let me know in the comments, see what you want to hear, or stay tuned for other videos. And thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you so much for watching and tuning in. I hope you come back. I truly enjoy this time with you. See ya.